Have you heard about the $1 trillion platinum coin idea that statists are now proposing to get around the debt ceiling? Join Richard Ebeling and me in this week's Libertarian Angle as we discuss that idea. I'm Jacob Hornberger, president of the Future of Freedom Foundation, and this is this week's Libertarian Angle, show that brings you the libertarian case for the free society in a principled, uncompromising way. And I'm joined as I am every week by my co-host, Richard Ebeling, who is a professor of economics at the Citadel. Richard, good to see you again.
It's good to see you and for viewers and listeners once more.
Yeah, thanks for tuning in. If you're new and you're just discovering FFF, come and visit us at fff.org for 31 years of principled arguments for the free society from a libertarian perspective. We have a great FFF Daily, which we strive and have strived for many years to make the best libertarian commentary page on the internet on a daily basis. It's for free. We have a monthly journal. We got this show, and we've got an ongoing civil liberties conference, and our co-host today, Richard Ebeling, will be our speaker next Tuesday, so be sure to tune in. Richard's going to be talking about the interrelationship between civil liberties and economic liberties, and I know it's going to be a great talk. So, Richard, last week we talked about the debt ceiling, and I thought, we ought to continue to revisit this issue because it certainly is heating up in Washington, D.C., and in the mainstream press. The Republicans are refusing to go along to vote to increase the debt ceiling. They're saying, well, the Democrats have control of both houses of Congress. They can simply vote it themselves. And for some reason, the Democrats want to get the Republicans on board with more debt. And so you've got this stalemate, which, of course, the statists are crying that the sky's going to fall in, that there's going to be a massive default and massive economic crisis and so forth. And of course, the first thing that enters my mind is, why didn't you think about this the last time the debt ceiling was raised? I mean, we went through this charade. We go through the charade every time the debt ceiling is reached. And you would expect that all these people that are crying Chicken Little would say, as soon as the debt ceiling was raised the last time and the previous time, hey, we need to now rein in public spending because we're going to reach this debt ceiling the next time. But they don't. They go out and they go into their bars and they have toasts to their great victory, and they laugh and joke about how they pulled it off again. And they know that they're just going to keep screaming for more government spending, more deficit spending until the next debt ceiling is raised. And then, here we go with Chicken Little again. But an interesting twist is that a lot of the statists, the mainstream statists, famous statists, are proposing an idea that, just a few years ago when it was proposed was considered ludicrous, and I think some of us would still consider it ludicrous, but they're proposing it as something serious now. And that is that the Biden administration issue a $1 trillion platinum coin that they would then deposit into the Treasury, which they say would then now circumvent the debt ceiling problem, and the government would have an extra $1 trillion to spend. So let me turn it over to you. You're the economics professor, and kind of explain to us exactly what is going on here with this $1 trillion coin, and what you think the fallacies in what's going on, and what do you think the consequences are going to be if they decide to go down that road?
Well, basically what has been proposed, and there are people in the U.S. government, in sort of fairness here, who are not enthusiastic about it. The U.S. Treasury Secretary, Janet Yellen, who used to be a Federal Reserve Board chairman, has said that she thinks that this is not an idea to move forward with. But there are others who have proposed it. But basically what it is that the government would use some of the platinum that they have as part of their commodity hoards and mint it into this coin. And then they would deposit this $1 trillion platinum coin into their own U.S. Treasury, as if $1 trillion worth of taxes had come into the Treasury from whatever sources. And then here we have $1 trillion more of revenues coming in because we've minted this coin from the government's own a hoard of platinum, like, they have a Fort Knox with gold. I guess they have some storage of platinum, and they said, well, it would be like, all of the billionaires of the United States, the Steve Jobs and the others, like all voluntarily giving $1 trillion of tax money to the Treasury so they could spend it without borrowing or taxing other people. And that's what's proposed. Now, of course, this is not real tax revenue. This is not real tax revenue. It's not as if Joe is now going to pay more taxes to the government, so that while the government has that dollar equivalent to spend, Joe has the dollar equivalent less to spend. Instead, what would amount to is the government would then view itself able to, in the computer world of ethereal money, to just start spending $1 trillion, which of course itself would threaten to be price inflationary, to the extent that this ethereal computer money would then be put out into the economy. People would spend it because the government would be paying interest payments to creditors. It would be paying Social Security. It would be paying jet fuel for Joe Biden's Air Force One. It would be paying for military salaries and equipment and so on. So at the end of the day, it would be basically inflationary. But it's also just, even if it were to be done, it's the most ludicrous short-run stopgap, because the Congressional Budget Office has estimated its recent short-term and long-term projections that the U.S. government will have as a budget deficit in the fiscal year that began on October 1, fiscal year 2022, over $1 trillion deficit. So at the most, this is a gimmick that would, in a sense, quote, cover the government's spending in excess of regular taxes coming in, income taxes, corporate taxes, etc., for barely a year. So this is just a way to circumvent the reality that they don't have the tax revenues coming in to cover all of the expenditure promises and commitments they've undertaken, both what's called entitlement and discretionary, and to basically circumvent the fact that it is up to the Congress, as it has been for many, 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 many decades, to set a debt limit. That is, the government may borrow no additional sums above a certain maximum, to basically alleviate the necessity of the Democrats alone, or the Democrats with some Republicans, saying that we're just increasing the credit line of the U.S. government. The same way, if you have a credit card, you call customer service and you say, can you raise my credit limit so I can spend an extra $5,000 on your card? That's what it amounts to. Let's keep in mind that the U.S. debt is currently over $28.5 trillion. And again, the Congressional Budget Office has estimated that given current legislation and expected trends of both, quote, entitlement spending, unquote, and discretionary spending, which includes anticipated defense spending, over the next 10 years, that is from 2022 to around 2031, 2032, there are going to be $1 trillion deficits for virtually each of those years, so that total debt in 10 years will be likely over $40 trillion. So this is not a solution to any problem. What is the solution to the problem? And this is going to sound like a broken record for those who have followed you and me for years. Government is undertaking activities of various and sundry sorts that are far beyond what a government should do if A, limited to the strict constitutional duties and obligations specified by the Founding Fathers in the Constitution, and from a broader philosophical perspective of classical liberal free market policy, far beyond what the government should do in a free society. You protect people from killing each other. You see that they aren't stealing from each other, and you see that they don't defraud and misrepresent each other. And that's what you have: police, courts, and a legitimate defensive posture for a military. Other than that, you virtually have nothing else for the government, the federal government, to do. And if the government was proceeded to narrow its activities and its horizon to that, either immediately or I'm going to be a Mr. Pragmatist over 5 years. Okay, okay. See, Jacob's now going to consider me a sellout. Oh, he wants to be an incrementalist. He's giving government 5 years to get his house in order. Oh, what? He's a commie. He's a commie. But in spite of your dogmatism here, I'm willing to give them, okay, 3 years. But the point is, departments, bureaus, and agencies should be perceived to be cut and at the end of the day, abolished, repealed, because they're not the legitimate functions of a government. If we were to do that, it would be an easy matter for the government to have enough tax revenues to cover the expenditures of such a minimal free market society government with neither deficits nor debt. Now, of course, that would involve goring a lot of oxes because of the welfare state and the military spending. But at the end of the day, we are spending, that is, the government is spending, far beyond the tax revenue means to cover everything the government has promised. And the accumulation of these kind of deficits leading to that much more debt is really unsustainable for the financial stability and growth of the economy, taking the long-run view. This will be a financial disaster. Only, unlike Greece and Argentina, there will be no other countries to bail us out, and there will be a great crash. Nobody can know when or how or to what degree, but our financial house is not in order. And the idea of trillion-dollar platinum coins is merely a ludicrous drop in the bucket to follow a short-run expediency, which even, as I said, many in government don't even want to try to do.
Yeah, well, you've raised a lot of good points. You're a little defensive, too, about your statism, but well, you mentioned price inflation, and it if we look at inflation as a tax, then we're really looking at the government taxing people with this trillion-dollar coin business, because if the monetary system is being debased through the issuance of gigantic amounts of new money, that's going to be reflected in rising prices. And we see that now. Remember all that free stimulus money? Well, how free is it now that people are having to pay so much more money at the gas tank or at the grocery store? I mean, it turns out that it's not free, that it's the fact that the money is being debased, which is reflected in higher prices across the board, and therefore people have less because the value of their money is less. And it looks to me like that's what this coin idea is that, okay, let's circumvent the law and in the process make people pay surreptitiously through higher prices. Now you mentioned the idea that there would be plenty of money if the government were limited to its legitimate libertarian functions. They keep saying that there has to be a default on the notes, on the debt. There really it doesn't, though. I mean, even given the current situation, if they were to cut the welfare spending, where there's no contract there's no contract on Social Security or Medicare, despite what people say. It's just a welfare program. All these are just welfare programs that are what are called entitlements. But the government can repeal these programs anytime it wants. It can reduce the benefits anytime it wants. There's no contract there like there is with a note. So, I mean, if they wanted to make sure they didn't default, all they got to do is cut welfare for domestically as well as the military welfare. I mean, I find it fascinating that the Pentagon's and the CIA's forever war in Afghanistan is now over, but the House of Representatives just voted to give them $700 and something billion. They gave them more than what the Biden administration even asked for. Yes. I don't understand that, Richard. If you're not spending those gobs of money to bribe people in Afghanistan anymore and on bombs and missiles and so forth, why do they need the same amount of money? It seems to me like that's the time when they should be cutting at least the amount of money that was being spent on the forever war in Afghanistan. And yet there's no indications they're going to do it. It's like the military budget is sacrosanct. And I would assume the same thing applies to the CIA and the NSA, that they're just immune from any cuts. And even when they talk about the government shutdown, they always say, oh, but the military will continue. Well, it just shows you the power of the military. Why should the military be exempt from a government shutdown. It's not like the United States is going to get invaded or occupied by anybody in the near term here. So the real question is, well, there's several real questions here, but one is, what are the ramifications of this massive borrowing and spending spree? The statists, some of the statists are saying this is actually beneficial. That they say, oh well, the libertarians have been predicting doom for a long time, and see, there's no doom, everything's going fine, it's all hunky-dory. Well, as you point out, it's not hunky-dory. This cannot end well. It's no different from like a family. Let's say a family is up to, they've hawked everything. They've got, $100,000 in credit card debt, and they barely can pay their interest. In fact, let's say they can't pay their interest on their credit card debt anymore, and so they go on and apply for a new credit card. Well, somebody might say, oh, everything's hunky-dory, everything's fine with that family, but it's not. It's just a matter of when, as you point out. When is the crash going to be? We can't predict when that'll happen, but we can look at other countries, like you mentioned, Greece. There's Italy. There's Venezuela. I mean, Venezuela just has this hyperinflation problem. I don't know if they minted platinum coins to get there, but they just lopped off 3 zeros off their currency, because I guess the currency had so many zeros that you had to pay $1 trillion note, like to go buy a loaf of bread or something. So I said, oh, we'll just lop off 3 zeros. And I think that's the second or third time they've done it. Well, if borrowing and spending is so beneficial, why is Venezuela in the depths of poverty and with a debased currency? Well, the same thing can happen here in the United States, and it will happen. I mean, this thing will not end nicely. As you point out, they're spending much more than they're bringing in every year, to the tune of at least $1 trillion. That doesn't take into account all the unfunded liabilities. When you talked about a $40 trillion debt down the road, on top of that is Social Security and Medicare and Medicaid. I mean, this is unsustainable, Richard. It's just really a matter of time, as far as I'm concerned.
Right. Just to make sure the viewers and the listeners are clear about what the terminology means. When it's referred to that the entitlement programs like Social Security or Medicare are unfunded liabilities, what this basically says is that projections have been made of how much money, given under existing legislation, the federal government will have to pay for Social Security payments to retirees, medical expenses under Medicare and Medicaid under current legislation, and a projection of population being eligible or needing it for a 75-year horizon. And then they estimate, well, given Social Security taxes under current legislation, Medicare and Medicaid taxes under current legislation, how much revenue will come in? And then what is the gap between what the amount of money the government is promising over these coming decades and the amount of revenues that will be coming in through tax sources to cover those commitments? And that gap is the unfunded liability. It's the amount that the government under current legislation would be obligated to pay if it kept its promises, over and above the tax revenues that will be coming in to cover it. For instance, just with Social Security, the Social Security Trust Fund issued its annual report just about 2 months ago, and basically said that by about 2033, 2034, which is just a little over a decade away, the Social Security Administration will not be taking in enough from the working age population in terms of the specific Social Security taxes that are taken from your salary, my salary, et cetera, to cover the obligations of what has been promised to retirees at that time, to the tune that under again, because I think listeners need to understand this, Jacob. Under current legislation, the Social Security Administration only has legal authority to spend money from 2 sources. The money it gets from our withholding tax for Social Security from our paychecks, and cashing in U.S. treasuries that have been put into the Social Security financial account based upon surpluses in Social Security that had been existing in previous years, that is, in previous decades, Social Security took in more Social Security taxes than they were paying to retirees. And the surpluses didn't sit in a lockbox. The Social Security Administration merely, quote, lent it, unquote, to the rest of the government to help cover some of those years' budget deficits of the past. So all of these Treasury IOUs promised to pay back the surpluses are sitting in the Treasury, the Social Security's account on the government's ledger books. And they have now had to start drawing upon those treasuries. So one part of the government has to, quote, pay back money to another part of the government. But what the Social Security Trust Fund is saying is that by 2033, 2034, they will have cashed out all of those US treasuries from previous lending to the rest of the government. So then they will only have what's coming in as taxes from the current working population, and that there will not be enough money. By how much? That at a certain date in 2033 or 2034, a retiree who's been getting his government Social Security check is going to find that one month it was $100, let's say. The next month it's going to be $75. In other words, Social Security payments are going to have to be cut by approximately 25%. That's a lot of money that people are going to notice they're not getting in their Social Security payments every month. And now, what does that mean? Either the government increases Social Security taxes, they change retirement age eligibility to slow down the number of people who are going to be eligible, okay? Or they change the benefit schedule, or some combination of those. Okay, we're assuming that off the table is privatizing Social Security because that's not even in their mindset. Given their mindset and you sort of the pragmatic politics of Washington, D.C., that's their only options. They raise Social Security taxes, they change age eligibility, or they lower benefits. That's all that they can do, or a combination of the three. Otherwise, people are going to find that suddenly 25% of the Social Security check is not going to be there in about 12 years.
Well, and that's assuming that there's not some sort of major crash before then. Because, I mean, if you put it all together, all the spending and all the borrowing that the government's doing, it does not paint a pretty picture. And so let's go to this. Yeah, were you going to say something?
No.
Let's go to this ideal that you were presenting. I think it's important that we continue presenting that ideal. I mean, last week, I think you pointed out that despite 31 years of FFF's principled approach to liberty, or I think you were implying because of it, things have gotten worse and worse and worse.
Post hoc ergo propter hoc.
Right.
Because A preceded B, B was caused by.
Right. Well, you know, it's a legitimate question, though, you know, that a person may ask, what's the point of continuing to donate to the Future of Freedom Foundation and other libertarian organizations? It's hopeless. There's no way that people are ever going to abandon this. And, well, for one thing, it's not hopeless. I mean, as things get worse and worse, people start thinking. They start reflecting. Yes. And when things are going hunky-dory, people don't tend to do a lot of pondering and reflecting. But things are getting bad, and everybody understands that they're getting bad. And all you need is another major economic crisis or a terrorist crisis produced by foreign interventionism. And so now's the time that we should be doing reflecting. And if there was ever a time when organizations like FFF are needed, it's to present what is the ideal, what is the solution to this? Because if there was no solution, Richard, then, you know, you and I could be selling cyanide capsules and probably becoming millionaires. But the fact is there is a solution, and that's reason for optimism in and of itself. And that solution is libertarianism. Now, is it popular? Of course not. I mean, people have been dependent on the welfare state and the warfare state for decades, all of our lives, really. I mean, the welfare state came into existence in the 30s. The warfare state came into existence with World War II and its aftermath. Everybody's accustomed to it. Everybody thinks this is freedom, that this is the ideal. Well, it isn't. And even the left, the progressives, they say when things start going wrong, they blame it on free enterprise and the capitalist system, just like they did during the Great Depression when they blamed the stock market crash in '29 on the free enterprise system and the failure of capitalism. Well, so what's the ideal? Well, The ideal is a society where government is limited to its rightful role in society, where we don't have these welfare state programs, where we don't have a massive military industrial complex, CIA, NSA. I mean, I'm talking about the sound founding principles of America, not the bad ones, slavery and women's rights and so forth, the good founding principles. I mean, it was so radically different from everything everybody's accustomed to. Imagine 100 years, more than 100 years, no Federal Reserve, no paper money. They use gold and silver coins as their medium of exchange. No income tax, no immigration controls, no drug war, no Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, farm subsidies, education grants, foreign aid, foreign interventionism, foreign wars. It's a remarkable way of life. And that was the key to that huge rise in the standard of living, especially like from around 1870, in the aftermath of the Civil War, to around 1910. Incredible period of time. People were going from rags to riches in one generation, two generations, despite the fact, or maybe because of the fact, that people were flooding into America, that people wanted part of this action. And then, of course, everything turned south when the generations that were living in the 1930s decided, oh, we don't want that way of life anymore. We want a welfare state. We want to be taken care of by the government. We want a Federal Reserve. We want an income tax. We want a warfare state, until where we are today. So in presenting this ideal, we're letting people know, hey, this is the way out of this thing. So as you're reflecting and you're pondering, what do you want out of life? Do you want this, a ward of the state type of existence, a serfdom existence, or do you want to live the life of a free individual? Well, our American ancestors pointed the way as to what the right way is, the morally right way, and the free way. And that's through a genuine free market system.
I'll just add to that one of the most difficult things to predict is the unpredictable, by definition. And nobody has a crystal ball to be able to anticipate, forecast, and predict exactly and how the future will evolve and develop. Crises have existed before. Darkness seemed to be enveloping countries and societies and civilizations. And sometimes the darkness has won. But there have been many instances in human history in which what seemed to be the darkness and the end and the crash found a way, often unanticipated and even not fully imagined by even some of the members of the society, that prevented such a cataclysm or put the society on a more stable course away from such a disaster. Now, if we are to reverse these things, or in the short run, even just slow it down as this leading step to reversal, that will not happen unless there is a change in the climate of ideas. And there will not be a change in the climate of ideas given the predominance of collectivist, statist, interventionist, welfare state, and now increasingly, quote, democratic socialist ideas in our society, with the Bernie Sanders and the AOCs gaining publicity and so on. There will be no change in the current and the trend of ideas unless there are those who choose to speak up intelligently and in an informed and articulate manner to say, this is not the right path. This has not been caused by freedom. This is the result of the very collectivist policies that many intellectuals and politicians continue to espouse. And this is the road to hell, regardless of the presumed rhetorical good intentions. And unless this is stopped and reversed and a different path is taken, disaster will strike, and with a severity and perhaps a prolongedness far greater than what that earlier generation had to experience in the 1930s with the Great Depression and the rise of totalitarianism in various parts of the world. So our task, if we care about liberty, if we worry about our own future and that of our children and grandchildren, is to take on the mantle of responsibility, each of us in our own little corners of the world, in different ways, given our circumstances and our time and our constraints and obligations, to take on a little bit of the obligation and responsibility of the world to try to persuade people, reason with people, argue with people, peacefully, honestly, non-rudely, non-confrontationally, to get them to see why we have reached the point that we're at, why it is leading down a wrong road, and what would be the right ideas and therefore the right policies that can begin the process of restoring America to being a truly free and prosperous and healthy and stable society in which not only will liberty be restored, but rising standards of living far greater than we've known will be possible looking to the horizon.
Yeah, no, excellent way to put it. You reminded me of that quote by Mises, that when Ludwig von Mises, that when society is hurtling toward destruction, it's imperative that people throw themselves into the battle
Yes.
and try to put things right, and realizing, of course, that the outcome is beyond our control. The only thing we have in our control is the ideas that we put out there. And so I think what you're saying is we should choose to put out sound ideas. And then if people accept them, great. If they don't, that's their decision. That's not our responsibility. The fact that you can take a horse to the trough, but you can't force him to drink. And then the other thing, Richard, is that it's fun fighting for freedom. I mean, I enjoy this work. I love it. I remember the exchange between two founding fathers. I forget who it was, and I think Paine was one of them. But one of them said, "Wherever there is liberty, that is my home." To which the other one responded, "Wherever there is not liberty, that is my home." And he was essentially saying that whenever there's an unfree society, he's going there so that he can fight for freedom rather than just enjoy the benefits of the free society. And so, in that sense, we have a great opportunity here to battle for freedom and not get burned out, not get frustrated and angst over whether it's going to happen today or whatever, but just enjoy the battle and know that we're in the process, we're doing the right thing.
Well, and we should perhaps appreciate that if our motto is to be where freedom is not, that is my home, then we're all citizens of the world.
That's very, very well put. All right. On that fine note, we'll wrap things up. Thank you for tuning in again. We had our fourth lecture last night. Excellent presentation by Michael Glennon. We'll be posting that soon. You'll really want to watch it if you didn't watch it live. Just excellent presentation. He's a professor of law at Tufts University. Fantastic credentials. And then we've got the great Richard Ebeling speaking next Tuesday. That's a talk that I know you're not going to want to miss. So thank you for tuning in, and we'll see you all next week. And Richard, I'll see you next week.
Till next time.